Okay, welcome to the Rockport Affordable Housing Coalition second learning event for citizens of Rockport. We're very happy that you're here in person, and we're happy for our 32 people on Zoom. It's quite the record turnout. This event is being filmed, as you know, and will be available. Everything will be available to you on filming the handouts on our website, which is rahc.us, Rockport Affordable Housing Coalition.us. So if you miss anything or get confused, which is very easy in this field, please look there and pass it on freely to your friends and neighbors. Our first event on February 25th, which is also on the website, was all about definitions. Words, definitions of words, acronyms, and everything of that nature when we're talking about affordable housing and housing in general. We do have a definitions sheet. I hope you picked it up outside so that you can catch up. If you hear people talking in acronyms, we'd appreciate you not do that too much. This time is for our presenters that will be talking about the planning that is already in the works for housing and can make Rockport more affordable. We as Rockporters are in a watershed moment to determine our future of housing. Do we want to become the new Nantucket, which was excitedly proclaimed at a town meeting? Do we want to become a retirement community? We are the oldest by age town in Massachusetts. And if you'll notice, our affordable housing is predominantly for seniors. Or do we want to become a family-friendly community that embraces economic, ethnic, racial, and generational diversity, which has always been a part of Rockport's history? In 1974, and there's a few of you who will remember this, Citizens for Rockport had a steering committee that was created with the goal to plan for the future. Their recommendation, their second recommendation, not their first, but their second recommendation was, and I quote, "Young families are having difficulty affording rent and homes in Rockport. Many of these people will be forced out of Rockport unless appropriate action is taken." That was in this report in 1974. In 2016, the Planning Board conducted a survey of all of our residents. And in this very room we were, and to determine what the Rockport priorities were for housing. And guess what came up? Having affordable housing and housing in Rockport was the number one for our priorities. So here we are. Clearly, housing is not a new issue for us. Clearly, our attention today is to give you more information about plans and possibilities here in our town. Mostly, it's to address your questions. I would like to introduce our panel. This is Ms. Lily Link. She is the MBTA Communities Engagement Manager for CHAPA. CHAPA means Citizens Housing and Planning Association. And then we have Mr. Robert Simmons in the middle, and he's a member of the Rockport Planning Board. And Mr. Andrew Dufranzia, and he's the Executive Director of Harbor Light Community Partners. Each will make a very short presentation, and then we open the rest of the time for questions. We have given each of you a card on your seat, and there's pens and stuff over there. And this is so you don't interrupt the presenter, but like me and most of the people in the room, perhaps, we have a tendency to forget our questions. So when Lily speaks and we have a question for her, and by the time Andrew speaks, we've totally forgotten it. So write down your questions. There's a second option or intention for those is if we don't get to your question or you don't feel comfortable speaking your question, is to leave it here for us so that we can decide if we need a third event or where the concerns are for everybody that may not want to speak. Zoomers, of course. Hi, Zoomers. They're still coming in. Look at that. Zoomers, you can ask your questions. Oops. You can ask your questions in the chat if you know how to use the chat. We'd appreciate that. We want to get your questions, or you can raise your hand when it's question time. So if you have a question when it's that time, you'll just raise your hand too. So with no further ado, I'm going to ask Lily to speak first, and she will take a second to hook her PowerPoint up to the cable here. Otherwise we're going to run out of time. So.
Well, I can use this. Thank you. Good morning. My name's Lily Link. As Diane said, I'm the CHAPA's Community Engagement Manager for all 175 MBTA communities. And thank you so much for having me here today. So I can go to the next slide. CHAPA, the Citizens Housing and Planning Association, is a nonprofit housing advocacy organization. And our mission is to encourage the production and preservation of housing that is affordable to low and moderate income families and individuals, and to foster diverse and sustainable communities through planning and community development.
Lily, you're going to keep your voice up. That mic doesn't work.
Okay. Massachusetts should always be a place where our communities nourish us and help us grow. And right now, housing is the single best investment that we can make to secure the future that we all want and deserve. Next slide, please. A diverse mix of homes in Massachusetts plants the seeds of our long-term success by protecting the environment, improving our overall health, improving the quality of our children's education, strengthening our economy, and building wealth for everyone. Ooh, do we have it over here?
Yeah.
Woohoo! Is that it?
Yeah, you want to advance it
Like
then.
this?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So why do we need more housing in Rockport specifically? Well, first off, Rockport is a beautiful and vibrant community with access to many amenities. You have nature, you have the ocean, you have culture. It's a place that a lot of people want to live. But as we've seen over the past 20 years, Rockport's population is actually decreasing. And school enrollment is down significantly as well. Currently, there are 4,380 housing units here in Rockport. 70% of which are single family, and the average number of residents in each of those homes are 1.6. So it's about 1 or 2 people living in each single family home. Rockport is considered an aging community, as Diane said. That means that compared to the rest of the state, there are much fewer people who are under age 55 and much more people who are over age 55 than the rest of the state. And folks in Rockport are already struggling with their housing costs today. 1 in 2 renters and 1 in 3 homeowners cannot afford their current housing costs. In 2021, Governor Baker signed into law the multifamily zoning requirements for MBTA communities, otherwise known as Section 3A is the technical term. And this applies to all 175 communities that are serviced by the MBTA. So rapid transit communities in the inner core that are served by the Red Line, Green Line, Orange Line, etc. Commuter rail communities like Rockport, and then all of the adjacent communities that share a border with the commuter rail communities. So multifamily housing can take many, many forms. Duplexes, townhomes, the classic New England triple-decker, cottage courtyard style housing where you have a number of standalone small units sharing a parcel. So it can take many, many different formats. And the benefits of building multifamily housing near transit are multifold. Multifamily housing, for starters, is more affordable than single-family homes. It's a simple economies of scale problem. If you're building a single family home versus a 3-family home on the same lot, the cost per unit is going to be much lower for the multifamily home. And when you build housing near transit, people can access work, retail services like the doctor's office, recreation, without exclusively needing the use of a car. And considering that transportation makes up 27% of our carbon emissions in the US, getting people out of their cars as often as possible is a really meaningful way to lower our carbon emissions. Additionally, car ownership is very expensive. In Massachusetts, it's more expensive than in other parts of the country too. It costs on average about $10,000 a year. So for people who are struggling with their housing costs, if we can get them into affordable housing near transit, we can also be lowering their transportation costs as well. So some really quick basics on the law, Section 3A. It must legalize multifamily housing as of right, meaning you cannot require a special permit process to build that multifamily housing in the area where it's zoned. The zone must be of reasonable size, meaning you couldn't just pick a scattering of parcels all around the town to have that zoning. It must allow a minimum of 15 units per acre, and I know that Bob has some great examples of what that actually looks like in the many properties in town that already fit that density or even exceed it. There cannot be age restrictions, so it cannot be exclusively for older adults. It must be suitable for families with children, so it can't exclusively be studio and one-bedroom apartments. There should be some 2, 3+ bedroom units as well. And at least a portion of it needs to be not more than half a mile from the train station. In Rockport, that is 40% of the multifamily district. So this is a little screenshot from a website called Residensity. That's a lot of fun to play around on and see what the existing density is of various parcels in town. And you can see here, this is a half-mile proximity around the Rockport station. The properties that are darker have a higher density.
It's a touch screen, be careful.
Oh, I'm not touching it. the parcels that have a darker color are higher density, lighter color is lower density. And so 40% of that multifamily zone would need to fall within the circle you see here. This would involve legalizing the capacity for an additional 657 units. And I'll be clear that that does not mean that these are going to get built today or necessarily ever. But if we don't make it legal to build them, we will never see more housing being built in Rockport. And the deadline to pass these zoning changes is December 31st, 2024, both for Rockport and for the rest of the commuter rail communities. So what you can do right now, as we are undergoing the process, all of these 175 communities are undergoing this process together at reviewing their zoning and seeing how they will be able to comply. And so what you can do is reviewing the guidelines to become more familiar with it. You know, I'll admit that it is very technical and complex. There's a lot of different overlapping things. People are still kind of getting their heads around it. But as you familiarize yourself with the guidelines, think about your priorities for housing in Rockport. Who do you see being able to live in Rockport 20 years from now? Do you want families, young families, people like myself and my husband to be able to move here to start our family? Do you want it to be a place where older adults could downsize and be able to move into a condo and, you know, give their single family home to a young family who can start their home ownership journey? Think about where you want that housing to be and what kind of housing you want to see in Rockport. Holding community conversations like this, where you can get together with other residents and hear from them about their priorities. Looking at any existing local plans you might have, whether it's a housing production plan, a master plan, a fair housing plan, to see what goals has the town already set for itself, and are you meeting these goals? And if not, could this be an opportunity to move those forward? And then lastly, attending community meetings as those zoning changes are proposed and ultimately passed, staying involved in that process and making sure that your voice is heard. So thank you so much for having me today. Please feel free to reach out to me directly if you want to talk about this more, and I look forward to hearing your questions. I'll leave this. Can I leave this here?
Yeah.
Will there be a question period after this?
Uh-oh.
All right. You have to just work with the small screen. Next slide, Tom. So Lily's covered a few of my points already, just with the background of the Rockport's current conditions and characters and so forth, and a little bit of a background on the MBTA requirements. So we'll push ahead on a few of these slides, Tom. One thing I just wanted to note here is a few of the demographic items that are on here. We do have about 4,380 housing units, about 3,400 parcels that have housing on them, and our population has been going down a bit, and has one of the most drastic prediction right now is 34% decline in 12 to 15 years. Yep, sorry. So out of the communities around here, I think we're equal with Hamilton in the greatest population decline that is predicted. And that's a UMass study. There was another study that was done by the state that is a little less drastic than that, but we've got some issues with our demographics and so forth. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Rockport's downtown density is currently in the downtown zone is about 32 plus dwelling units per acre, which is over double what the MBTA density is that's currently being asked for in the rezoning of their needs for building more housing stock. You can advance up here. Go ahead. I think we've covered, Lily's covered most of these points. 40% of the required rezoning would have to be in the half-mile radius, which has about 252 acres of developable land, which includes, it should really be called redevelopable land because a lot of the land is already developed, but it includes that, and the added capacity for 657 units includes units that are already in place there. So we're just looking to see if we can add a unit or two, say, per parcel to get to where we would need to be. She's already kind of gone over the details on the right-hand side of this slide, so we'll just move on to the next one. As I think she may have mentioned, there are some carrots and there are some sticks to this, but I think as a planning board member, and I'm new to the town, I'm just sort of delving into all of the demographics of the town and what we are currently, where we are currently at. But right now our downtown and our residential districts are much less dense currently than the existing conditions on the ground. You know, a lot of our residential district right now is 4 to 5 dwelling units per acre, roughly. A lot of quarter and fifth acre size lots that have one house on them.
Will you adjust the microphone a little bit? That mic can't work, otherwise we would be disrupting the Zoomer, so it's a problem. So you just gotta
Okay, I'll just, okay.
Go ahead and howl.
I'll holler. All right. So some of the items that I see as carrots here is that we have the ability to create an overlay district that would get us closer to the reality of the existing Rockport, being able to maintain that character, that density, that village that people from all over the country come to see every summer. We can add into an overlay district requirements like a percentage of affordable housing, for example. We can bring in requirements for other things that involve parking and open space and all of these other things that we desire a little bit more of, perhaps, into these new planning efforts, right? Making our city a little more walkable, relying more on the transit that we do have available. Remote work at home may be another thing that we're able to attract more people from farther away from the metropolitan Boston area, right? Now that we have the ability to work at home, but that means added stresses on our electrical grid, on our sewage systems. We're all going to be staying at home more, using more energy here versus somewhere else. We talked about affordable housing. And the other thing I think to me that is important, especially for Cape Ann, the Cape Ann region, is we've got a place where we have a fair amount of open space in the center of our island here. And one thing that could happen with uncontrolled growth is that we checkerboard out lots that are way out in the farmlands and away from streets, utilities, sewers, all the things we need to have for better housing, and we stay away from the more expensive land areas that are closer to town, closer to transit, all that stuff. So this is the MBT thing is really a smart growth thing where we're looking at trying to reuse the capacity that we have right here in the central business district. Next. This is the radius, the half-mile radius, as you can see, which actually flies out into the ocean there a little bit. But so that's about 500 acres of space, and when you take away all of the town land and the ocean and all of that, it comes down to about 252 developable acres. Next. So I started looking at the density of the existing parcel by parcel situation here in Rockport Town Center. The area outlined there in red is the downtown district, just for clarity, and most of the rest of it that you see is the R residential district. And the next slide will zoom in here a little bit better to get a better sense of it. But you can see all of those parcels in bright yellow are 15 dwelling units per acre or more, or a lot more right now. Bearskin Neck is probably in the neighborhood of 60 dwelling units per acre. And the rest of the downtown area, I'm guessing, is roughly about 32 to 40 dwelling units per acre currently. And that is a lot of lots that are non-conforming, that don't have setbacks, that don't have parking, would not comply with current zoning, right? But it gives that character that we have today. And you can see that it's only about 2 blocks or so before you hit the train station TOV area that's already been created as an overlay district in town. And I won't touch it. You can see that the density sort of naturally growing over there as well. Some of the big yellow areas there are the current public housing developments here, 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 here. But you can see that there's a lot of existing, just putting 1 or 2 dwelling units on a very small lot that we currently have gives you a very high density. And what does that look like? Let's move to the next slide here. These are just some examples around town of 15 dwelling units per acre. The house on the left, I believe, is off Parker Street there. It's a simple single-family house on a small lot, which is in the R zone, on a relatively small lot. And there's a fair amount of those. The 2 on the right are in Bearskin Neck, where they basically have no setbacks, no parking, and they're built out right to the edges of the lot, essentially. The next slide, you'll see some situations that are much denser. The one here on Mount Pleasant Street on the left is 4 units, and it's at 22 dwelling units per acre. But it's got a fair amount of green space around it. On the right there, you've got 2 that are packed in at Bearskin Neck at 40 dwelling units per acre. And that little house down on the bottom right is 100 dwelling units per acre. It's literally on 1/100th of an acre, which is, not much bigger than a double-car garage. So what I'm getting at here is the density of the MBTA is asking for is not too much different than what we already have in place in town, but our zoning doesn't really match that. Next one. This is also this is a project that I'm actually working on now in South Boston on a 5,000 acre site. It's got 3 2,000 square foot units. These are big 3-bedroom units, 3 parking spaces on site, and it's a corner lot, which is really restrictive, but it's at 27 dwelling units per acre. So I show this because it's a house that looks a lot like some of the 1800s houses around town, and has that same character. Next one. And this is just sort of a map of going from the lightest color to the darkest color is from small lot sizes to large lot sizes. And we'll zoom in here on the next slide so you can see things a little bit better. But everything that is red, blue, or purple, the darker, more dense, is 10,000 square feet and above. And you can see that there's not very many lots in town that are 10,000 square feet and above. The current zoning for single family in our residence requires 10,000 square feet for a single dwelling unit. All right. There's also the next slide here just shows that there's very few lots that have 2 dwelling units and a 10,000 square foot plus. The green are the areas that have that sort of size and density combined, and the blue is everything else there. Next. Also, I thought it would be interesting just to see we had the DPW look at if they could help us find data on all the town-owned land and the private land that was undeveloped currently, that has nothing on it. And the slide on the left is the entire town, and the slide on the right zooms in a little bit more towards the train station. And you can see that there's very little land that's available in that half-mile radius that is a clean slate, if you will. All right. So I think that the MBTA thing is a real opportunity to sort of change, to get our zoning to be a little bit more in line with the character that already exists in the areas of the downtown area and the R residential, which comprise most of the village sort of dense area. And the ADUs that were recently passed last May may be another sort of way to affordable housing, I think, as we were saying, with a small a instead of a capital A for the technically correct affordable housing that meets the state requirements. But we have the ability in every zone, I think, except Tom, for SSA. Is that correct? Every town, every zone in town is able to have an accessory dwelling unit now. SRAA, sorry. Yep. And so that gives people the ability to have anywhere from a 250 square foot unit to a 900 square foot unit, which would comport basically with a normal two-family, or a normal two-bedroom, two-bath unit.
What does that SRAA mean?
The SSRA is a small, dense district that's you can.
Watershed, isn't it?
40,000 square feet and above.
Watershed.
Yeah, it's
Single-family houses.
yeah, it's large lots. So it's a small area of the entire town. But the ADUs allow you to do an accessory dwelling unit either within or outside of the main dwelling unit that's anywhere from 250 to 900 square feet, but never more than a third of the unit for the detached situation. But that gives you the ability. ADUs are sort of inherently probably smaller than your average dwelling unit in town, so inherently less money rental-wise or ownership-wise. And generally speaking, they're using less parking. There was a study in Portland when they made ADUs legal in 2009, I believe, to look at the 2,000 plus units that have since been developed there. Those units are using 0.93 parking spaces per dwelling unit versus the city average of 1.13. so they're using a little bit less parking, and they've come up with the system where they provide the parking spaces, but they allow the residents to opt out of renting the apartments, the parking space, so that it can go to somebody else if they don't need it. So it brings in more parking for other people in town. Next slide. So as they slowly wandered their way through the regulations they had on ADUs, they gradually found that when they eliminated some of the barriers to the ADUs, which were some of the fees that were required, they had fees that would help support additional sewer and utilities and so forth like that. And their numbers skyrocketed, and I think they've got about 2,000 roughly ADUs that were permitted up to 2019 there. But it did allow, this represents about 1 out of every 150 lots in the whole Portland area. So if you apply that to our scale, that only produces 22 more ADUs in Rockport's population if you use the same math that they've been able to achieve. So it's something to think about. It's not like going to be a game changer necessarily, but it could add to our housing options. Next slide. This is a graph of the cost of the ADUs in general, and if you look at the average cost of ADUs, it's pretty close to the typical rental in Portland area. But when you look at the distribution there, you'll see that there's a bunch of units that are down at $0 to under $500 a month. Typically friends and family ADUs that are happening, but it does have a component of affordability, even though it doesn't meet the state requirements for housing stock inventory. So there is a knock-on effect there of getting more affordable units, and overall the rents here are noticeably less than what they would be for the average size unit in Portland. All right. I think that's all I had. Again, just in terms of opportunities, I think we have the ability to craft whatever Rockport wants here with these overlays. So I'm hoping everybody can stay involved in the conversation, and we can try to come up with something that works for everybody in town here, and has a real and more immediate effect on affordability in Rockport.
Thank you.
All right. Well, the good news, if you promise not to tell anybody, is I don't have any problem with the yelling. I went to seminary, but I won't admit it if you bring it up again. But I did, and so I'm happy to bellow. I also, ironically, grew up as one of the only Italian Baptists in New Jersey, and that's a different story, but it's true. And I'm happy to talk about that also at a different time. But the yelling thing is fine with me. So I think our purpose here, and notice my friend Rosa is much more technically savvy than me, which is why, again, I'm not touching anything.
Do you want the clicker?
And it's working out fine. See how that goes?
Okay.
Thank you. So that's me. I'm Andrew. It's nice to see everybody. Some of you I've met before. Some of you I have not. And hello to all the Zoomers at home. We're going to give you a little feedback about some of the things that we do. We're specifically interested in affordable housing, which I think everybody knows. And then we'll also, I think the main thing here is the main feature is the questions. So I think that's what we'll be here for. I assume there'll be a range of those. So quickly, we'll just give you a sense of us. We do this variety of things. Excuse me, this microphone. We do a variety of things, and this gives you a little snapshot of it. We are affordable housing developers. For those of you who have not been up the street in a while, you can take a look at something that's getting done there. I'll talk a little bit more about that. We do a lot of resident services for populations that, in addition to maybe an economic vulnerability, have some other additional vulnerability. So seniors, for example, homeless individuals, people with disabilities. So we're interested in that. We do a lot of advocacy and education work, so things like this, or being at the State House, or talking with our public officials about different policies we think might be helpful. And then we manage our properties that we develop long term. So when we first come in to make them, we're the same people that run them. Apparently I did something wrong to the microphone. So that's in a nutshell what we do. This gives you a sense of how many folks we have, how many units we have. We're involved, we only work north of Boston, and we're involved heavily in about 12 of the 20 or so communities on the North Shore, Rockport being one of our favorite. That's sort of the nuts and the bolts. These are some of the units and the buildings that we have that you all probably are aware of, and some of them. You'll see some of your favorites there up at the top, Pigeon Cove Ledges up in the top right corner, Rockport High School Apartments just next door, literally, to you here. And then we have some stuff in the cooker that I mentioned earlier. These are some of our other properties. We have things all around the region, so Gloucester, Rockport, Hamilton, Wenham, Beverly, Salem, Ipswich, Peabody, Marblehead, Lynn. So we're sort of kind of everywhere. Rowley now. So happy to talk to you about how some of those work. As I just mentioned, two buildings that I'm sure are near and dear to your heart are ones that we preserve. Those were preservation deals. I recall some of you being involved or being there in the first early meetings. These both were funded originally by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, believe it or not. And when their affordability expired, we preserved them. I also had a terrifying moment, I believe, at the first town meeting I had to go to in the gym, where Toby was sitting in the front, as he is now, and asked me a question, which I expected he would, but I had to wait all town meeting. I was there for about 8 hours in the bleachers until we got to our moment, and I thought, this guy, I know he's going to ask me something difficult when I get up there. I'd never met him, and when we got up there, sure enough, he got right to it, and it's been a friendly experience ever since. So that was about 10 years ago, believe it or not. These are all of the communities that we're in. You'll notice a glaring gap in our teeth there in Manchester and Essex. Don't worry, someday we'll fix that. I don't like having a gap in the map, but we'll get to that eventually. We've had a lot of conversations with folks in Manchester and Essex, so we keep trying. People call us all the time. Can you help with this? Can you help with that? And so we're always trying to be responsive to the region and at the community level to respond in a contextually sensitive way to their goals for housing. And we're happy to be doing that. This is the one I was talking about earlier. If you haven't seen this yet, you should walk by. So this, you all are involved with this through CPA funds and in other many ways. This is right up the street on Granite Street. You'll see this building right here in the front is a senior building. So somebody mentioned multi-generational. This is going to be 17 small supportive senior units. This is modeled after another building of ours called Harbor Light House. It's meant to help seniors who both have an economic pressure and need supportive services to remain independent and on the island to be able to stay, which is pretty awesome. And there are also 7 townhouses to the side of this. It's a quirky lot. Some of you may know it. Used to be the old Silver Brothers. So the lot swings around, and so on one of the legs we have 7 townhouses going in there. And it's very exciting. The siding is going up on this building right now, so please come by and take a peek. We'd be happy to have you take a look. We are always trying to sort of influence or be involved in helping better understanding like this of how affordable housing works, how it can work, how it could work better. But pretty much all day, every day, we want to be involved in that, and these are some of the ways we are. We just ran our Housing Institute in Cape Ann. Was that this week?
It was like 3 days ago.
Oh my gosh. This week, it's been a busy week, and in Gloucester, and so some folks were there. We ran the previous one in Salem, and so we'll move that around the region. We also have some other things that we're involved with. Housing Stewards is sort of a new program where we're going to be cultivating and helping people who want to be more active in supporting it, grow in their knowledge and their activity. So if you're interested in that, Rose is your person. This is, we will often try to help our state level officials understand or have a chance to ask questions about specific housing policy items. And so we'll invite them once a year in the spring to these meetings. I actually think this is the first, these are the events where I first realized I was going bald in the back, because I saw pictures later from behind, and I thought, who is that guy? And then I realized, oh yes, that's me. So anyway, this one is from the side, so that helps a little bit. The Housing Institute, as I mentioned, was in Gloucester, so I think these are pictures. The ones to the right were in Salem. Is that one to the left, actually?
The one on the top right is the only one from Salem.
The others are all from 3 days, so very fresh. These are very fresh pictures. Those are Gloucester from the other day, 2 days. Housing stewards, I just mentioned. We'd love to have anybody involved who's itching to be more active in how to support housing-friendly policies, especially around issues of racial segregation. We'd be delighted to talk with you and have you get involved in that way. And some of that's only a phone call or an email to a public official to advocate for something, but we're delighted to have you do that. And that's my email down there. If anybody would like my phone number, I'm happy to give it as people want it. And that's the map that we had. So we're delighted to field questions per the moderator's direction whenever you would like to do that. It's nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Can I unplug this without?
Yeah, what's going to happen?
I don't know. It worked.
It worked. Great. Sorry for you to think that this is actually a shill. Doesn't work, which is unfortunate. But we can't do that and get the Zoomers at the same time. There's a lot of feedback that happens. So now is our question and answer time. And for the Zoomers, I'll just go to Tom, who will speak them for the Zoomers. But let's start here with this group. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Let me go ahead. Helena, why don't you go ahead? If you'd stand up and say your name, that'd be great.
Yeah, this may not relate to Rockport. I don't know how many 2- and 3-family homes there are. And maybe you, maybe you know the answer to that. But the question is, there was a letter submitted to the Boston Globe a few weeks ago, submitted by several mayors throughout the Commonwealth. And the issue that was raised was the possibility of providing more affordable rentals by allowing, and I'm sure would have to go through some legislative process, allowing a tax incentive for privately owned homes with multiple units, so that they would then make their rental units more affordable. I don't know if that's something that's on the table that has been communicated to the legislature, and then in turn, would that lessen the number, that would up our affordable units and lessen the numbers that would have to be met in order to meet state requirements.
Great question. Anybody can address anything.
The only thing I think, and Lily I think
Speak up,
mentioned it.
really speak up.
Lily mentioned it, was that I think we had about 70% of our units are single family, 30% are multifamily. I don't know the numbers of 2-family, 3-family, 4-family.
I just pulled
we're
that
working
up.
on that.
Yeah, I just pulled that up. It's about 10% 2-unit and 10% 3 or 4 unit.
So can I comment
Sure,
on it?
absolutely.
It's an interesting idea. I flirted with it a few times, this concept. What I think it would essentially be a TIF, a tax incremental finance district, which maybe some people are familiar with. It's a way that municipalities have authority to give property tax breaks for an incentive on something that wants to get built. So, for example, the biggest one probably in the area people would know is the Cummings Center. Was a TIF and the subject of much debate, but turned out to be a pretty powerful economic engine. So it is an interesting idea. What it would do, I think that you're after, is it would get units on the subsidized housing inventory, which would increase the percentages that Rockport would have against the state goal. The challenge with it is it would then have to go through the requirements to be on the subsidized housing inventory, which would include a lottery, a certain kind of marketing, and it would have to have a deed restriction on it for that purpose. So whether or not, you know, smaller landowners would want to do that is debatable, but I think it's got some intriguing elements to the concept. I like it.
It's a possibility, that's what we're discussing, plans and possibilities.
Yep.
Hold on a second, I'm
And
gonna take a zoomer.
supporting small-time landlords
right.
who aren't big property managers trying
Right.
to make the quick buck. They just want to live in their home and, you know, rent out a unit or two.
Exactly. Can we take a Zoom question?
Laura Stevens, can you unmute? You can read the question. Can you show?
Hi. Yeah. Okay. It's easy. I was at the town green meeting remotely earlier in the week, and we had one of our DPW commissioners presenting. And in the course of his presentation, he noted that we have a failing infrastructure, that we are right now at capacity for our water usage and our sewer capacity. So my question is, how can you do mindful development when we are maxed out with our infrastructure and, according to him, have no funding sources that are clear for the foreseeable future?
It's a good question.
It's a good question.
Yeah, a couple of. I think I'm the developer here. So, a couple of things to think about. One is this is a pretty frequent question and challenge around the region, and our infrastructure stressors are going to have to get dealt with one way or the other. So I think noting what they are, different communities have different levels of pressures. Some are doing better than others, depending. And so that's going to be a live problem in all cases. What it does lead to, though, is I think that any kind of new development that you want to get done has to be as thoughtfully and mindfully efficient as possible. So you want to get as much on the site itself that's going to bear the load. So your water efficiency, your power efficiency, and it's difficult to do that. It's hard to make that happen. We're doing a lot of that with our buildings, but it is not simple, particularly as you have to deal with the electrical utility. But you are going to have to be thinking about that. I know the project we're doing now on Granite Street, we had to fix a bunch of things that were not related to us specifically or exclusively as a part of the deal. So we had to fix a sewer pipe, pay into a fee for water system infrastructure improvements, and a variety of other things to contribute to the resources of the solution. Also not easy, but that's what we had to do.
You're gonna haul us some water too?
Depends on where from.
Yeah, exactly. And as I recall, at the select board meeting, they voted on pursuing some grant money for infrastructure. It's around there.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, Z. Supla. One of the things I brought up, the planning board had a meeting a couple of nights ago that presented a lot of this affordable housing things that are going to be in conjunction with articles that they'll be presenting at town meeting.
Correct.
And when they talked about the transit-oriented development, I brought up the fact that I had heard that most of the impetus for this transit-oriented development came from the fact that the state of Massachusetts was concerned about companies that wanted to have high-income, professional, technically savvy type workers that desperately needed them to come in because that's the thrust of the Massachusetts economy. And that what was happening is that these people would be offered a job, whatever, 6 figures, more money than I ever made in 10 years. And then they would say, where can I live? And they would say, well, go out to here or go out to there, and then take a look at the housing prices and say, sorry, I got a job in Austin that pays $10,000 less, but I have to pay $29,000 less for housing. So the question is, my problem is that when at this planning board meeting, I said, I don't see that this promotes affordable housing at all. And Jason Shaw, chairman of the planning board, said, I'll take it up with Maura Healy. So would you just sort of maybe address that aspect of it?
I can speak
You want it?
I can speak to that.
Mhm.
So we find ourselves today in the entire state with a housing shortage. We do not have enough homes for the number of people who want to live here, regardless of what sector they work in or what part of the state they want to live in. And that's the result of many decades of bad housing policy, but first and foremost, single family zoning, because there's only so much land to go around, and when we have zoning rules that make it so that you need an acre to build one home that can house one family, you're going to run out of space pretty quickly, and housing costs are going to skyrocket. And so the impetus behind this law was to address many, many decades of exclusionary zoning, making it impossible to build the housing that we need to build. And specifically wanting to build it near transit stations, because we have a major traffic issue in Massachusetts. Last year in 2022, INRIX, a transportation data analytics firm, found that people in the greater Boston area spent 134 hours that year just sitting in traffic. So not driving, but 134 extra hours beyond what they should have spent based on if they were able to drive at a reasonable pace, sitting in traffic. And like, these are our lives, you know, that's 134 hours of our precious time being taken away to driving. And so to be able to both address the housing shortage through legalizing the production of more housing, and also to address the traffic issue, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a serious climate issue as well, that was really the impetus behind to try to tackle those two things at once.
So at a local level, the one takeaway on the MBTA stuff that we would want to put in there, if you could, is you can make at a local level. There's not at a state level an affordability requirement, which we think is we Harbor Light, you know, it's the one thing about it that we did not like, or the major thing. But you can add at a local level, when you decide what you're going to vote on, you can add an affordability requirement that's applicable to Rockport. I believe 10% is the max, and then with another feature, you could go to 20.
Yeah.
You know this better than me, Lou.
Could you make it 100%?
You cannot. That's 20 is the highest you can get under this.
Thank
But
you.
I would encourage you to do what you can do, which is try to get to the 20.
Let's take a Zoom question.
Lauren, can you unmute?
I don't know what the feature is to get from 10 to 20. Oh, that's it. Okay. All right. Well, that would work.
You're unmuted. Please speak.
Well,
It's not on camera.
okay. So can we go to another question, sir?
Sure.
Go ahead.
This question is directed at Andrew. So, Andrew, in terms of the project ongoing here on Granite Street, what is the approximate cost, the hard cost and the soft cost, for each unit being built?
Yeah, a lot. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's a lot.
Approximately.
Andrew, it was roughly $585 is what Leonard presented the other night.
Okay, there you go.
So $585,000 per unit.
Yeah.
So I guess the point I want to make is that there's an opportunity for private investment to add to our overall housing stock. Not that it's going to be necessarily deed restricted,
Right.
as is the case with your project.
Right.
But it can help and should be considered as part of a solution to this problem we have.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. And it's good to know, you know, the number that Rosa mentioned, fully loaded, is when you do something that gets you deed restriction, which gets you compliance with the subsidized housing inventory, just to your question earlier, the requirements on that are significantly more than building the unit, right? Building the unit it's not the easy part, but it's the, you know, you're required to have operating reserves and replacement reserves all capitalized up front. So some of that number is construction, some of that number is, you know, permitting and design, and some of that number is capitalized reserves the state requires to participate. So yeah, it's not sometimes people think I built something, it's this much, you know, I can build it that much.
So if I may follow up?
Sure. Through the chair.
So my name's Harry Korsel, and I'm on the planning board too. The whole notion of ADUs provides an opportunity
Agreed.
for us as a community to construct additional dwelling units at a fraction of the cost of a projects such as
Yeah.
the Granite Street project.
Yeah.
So I think people
Yeah, I agree with that.
should open their minds to how this can be leveraged
Yeah.
at a reasonable investment
Yeah.
to create the units we need.
Yeah, we would agree with you there.
Exactly, and vote for the citizens petition at the town meeting, vote yes to get 12-month minimum leases.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Are we Zoomer?
We have another John Porter.
Hi, John Porter, Meadow Road. Do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My question is part of public safety. If we add 657 units, what's that going to do to our volunteer fire department, and even more so, our ambulance? They're both pretty much maxed out to where they are now, and you add this new infrastructure, you know, look at the cost of, that it's going to be for that. Is there any plans to subsidize that in any way? Thank you.
Start. So 2 points I want to make. One is to really clarify the difference between capacity and production. So what this law requires is that Rockport legalizes the capacity for 657 units, which, especially looking at the zone that Bob was talking about in the downtown area, it already far surpasses that, actually. And the way I like to think about zoning is it's the table you're serving the meal on, and you have all kinds of opportunities to get creative with what you want to put on the table, but if you don't have the table, then you can't serve anything. All of these units, however many end up getting built, 50, 100, 0, will be people who are paying taxes into the tax base, which is what provides all of these services. And so while there might be new people here, they will be paying for themselves. They're not here, as an act of charity.
Yeah, the other thing I think that's good to think about, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, Lily, which I might be, is that your capacity for those extra 600 and plus units, depending on how you draw the circle, you already have a bunch of those units in that district. So it doesn't mean that there's going to be 600, and I think a lot of people think when they see the number, that means we're going to have 650 more units than we had. It's that you have to have the ability, the board game rules, to build it in that zone, of which you already have a whole bunch. And so the odds, the incremental number is likely to be smaller, and the amount of timing is likely to be long.
Right. I mean, housing takes
Yeah,
so long to be built. It is, it's its greatest flaw, but also it's an opportunity that each step along the way there is a public process where these things can be looked at and determined, is this the right move for us?
Yep. Man in the back.
Thank you. Thank you guys for the presentation today. I just think we need a bit more information. We need to know how many units now in the R district qualify, so we can actually have an idea of what this thing is going to look like. Also, the CHAPAS guidelines point out that 60% of the multifamily housing can go outside the R district. Have you explored that option, what that looks like? The other thing is when housing is very expensive to build, Harry, as you got to, so when you take subsidies, that means that you have to open it up to the entire United States. It's not just for Rockport residents. The first lottery round is for Rockport residents, 60% preference. After that, it's anybody, people from Alaska can move here if they want. Okay, the other thing is when you subsidize housing to be built, you have to have a certain percentage that is people making 30% or less of the local median income down to 0, like completely subsidized. So for instance, at Granite Street Crossing right now, half of the family housing is 30% or less of the local median income. So I'm wondering in the future when you guys build around here, what percentage would be, completely subsidized rental for you guys?
So
and the last thing, is you showed, we saw a picture of the density of bearskin neck, which is really interesting to see that. However, that's like a very small area. Imagine acres of that. I moved here from Seattle, and we actually rezoned a lot of neighborhoods, and the result was a lot of nondescript housing, but still very expensive. because there was demand. This is a resort town, there's demand to be here, so I'm just afraid if we build a lot, it's just gonna stay high priced.
Right.
And the last thing is the train noise and pollution at the train yard is crazy.
Yes.
You guys need to address that first, and then talk about building houses.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's the MBTA.
Yeah.
That's you.
Thankfully, we're not in charge of the trade.
Yeah.
So
I do want to clarify one thing.
Next panel.
The guidelines about having 40% be within that half mile and 60% being wherever else the town decides to put it, those are not CHAPA's guidelines, those are the state's guidelines. So just to be clear, that's not my decision or my suggestion, I'm just passing along that information.
Yeah.
I also don't work for the MBTA, so when it comes to designing the commuter rail station with noise barriers, trees, things that can kind of eliminate some of those sounds and other forms of pollution, I totally think that those are really important, but again, that's out of my personal purview.
It's okay to respond? So a couple points. I think there was at least one point in there that I wanted to respond to that was a question, or a statement that maybe helps clarify. You don't have to have any percentage at 30% of median income. That's not a requirement of anybody. We do that. That's partially our goal, particularly because that's when we're doing, especially this elderly building, we do a lot of that. And so we're really trying to get low-income seniors with a level of frailty who want to stay on the island, and we have a lot of other kind of housing like that, where you have a single widow on Social Security and maybe a little pension who's making less than $20,000 a year. And so we're overtly trying to design the financial structure to be able to respond to those folks. And so when we design that financial infrastructure, that's the way that we do it. And so if we know we're trying to target a certain demographic, we'll try to do a certain amount of 30% units. Usually our buildings are tiered, so there's a 30% median income tier, a 50% tier, a 60% tier, because you're trying to missionally address different things. For the family housing, we're trying to make sure that there's family housing there, especially for essential workers. So you want to target your income levels to be able to respond to the incomes they're generating at certain jobs to be able to do that. So just as I thought that might be helpful. It's not a requirement.
Thank you. That's great. I take a Zoom question.
I have a question from M. It's a cryptic name.
What's the name?
Thanks. They're waiting for you, so you know. Wouldn't the first step logically be to determine whether we can increase the water supply and the sewage capacity before planning any additional housing? Because I'm not aware that it's, since we get our water by quarry, is it possible to increase it? And I don't know about the sewage processing situation.
I don't know if you can speak. Yeah, we don't.
And there's a request to speak up when people talk for Zoom.
Yes.
All right. I don't know if I can answer that question, only to say that the Section 3A guidelines ask us, as we're developing our plan, not to consider sewage and water capacity in terms of developing the district. Now, what that means, I don't know. But like I think, as you alluded to earlier, the developers can easily be asked to put in money to funds to get the utilities up to the level they need to be, and to add to funds that will, a general fund that could also do the same thing. So that is totally up to our design and where we decide to draw the boundaries of this and how we work with that. The other thing I would say is, even if the zoning gets changed or through an overlay district, the developers and landowners have a different option to go, which is through an overlay district, which has different zoning. You then have the ability to craft that to make that all better with the town's goals.
So, no. Go ahead. In the back.
Oh, and I meant to say also too, these developments may have zoning as of right for multifamily, which is 3 units per parcel or more, but it does not eliminate site plan review, which involves how traffic impacts are, where curb cuts are, where all of those things happen, open space, all of that. landscaping, screening buffers, all that still gets reviewed project by project. So we have the ability to control not the multifamily aspect outright, but the rest of the how the project lands onto the site and the community.
There's about 100,000 steps between the idea to build something and the day that people can move in, and zoning is pretty much step one. And so this is like, we just have to take that first step so that we can get to all those subsequent questions.
Go ahead.
Ann Patrice is my name. I am very much for affordable housing. I was very much for ADA requirements too. And what I have seen happen in town is that we cannot afford to do what we are required to do, which gets all the townspeople angry at each other. The kids that have the disabilities that need the services aren't getting the services, and the people aren't getting paid, and the stuff, and then the kids, and then we have people take people out of our system and put them in private school. So this whole idea is based on a couple of things. Communities in transit. If your idea is that Rockport is a place where you sleep and you go someplace else, the MBTA plan kind of makes a bunch of sense. If your idea is that Rockport is a place where you live and work, the MBTA plan does not make it necessarily easier for us to continue doing that. Because the MBTA plan is based on this idea that if you increase the supply, you will reduce the cost. And that is not the case in Rockport. We have a lot more houses than we did in 1990. The cost of the houses is way higher. The cost of living here is way higher. The cost of our water is way higher. The cost of our insurance is way higher. The cost of our cars that we need to get to, not all of us live down here, to get to the MBTA. The cost of everything we do is higher, and more people want to move here, but they're not the people that we want, right? Because the people
focus
we
yourself
want.
Into a question, Ann Patrice. Focus yourself into a question.
Yes. Okay. So my question is, I don't believe we can go through this. How can we change the zoning without having the DPW in the conversation? I understand that the laws don't want you to consider the resource use, but I'm saying that that is a disaster. That is we are headed straight into disaster if we do not consider the fact that every tree you take down is going to affect the eelgrass. So when you say that something is, there's nothing on land, that's not right. Because even land that has no building on it is keeping fish in the ocean. Potentially. Potentially. It could be covered with blacktop, in which case it is not keeping fish in the ocean. However, if it's covered with blacktop already, we could put some charging stations in there, and the town could be making money from something other than beach passes. So there's a lot to consider here, and it doesn't have to do with getting to Boston. So I would love to see more of the actual how does it work in Rockport answered. And God bless Harbor Light, God bless all of you. I really want this place to be an affordable place to live. I don't like that we have Episcopal priests that grew up here that can't afford to move their family back in. I don't like that our police who grew up here cannot afford to live here. I don't like the fact that a whole bunch of us who were blessed enough to figure out how to move here in our 30s are going to be forced out of town because now we're retired and old and we're not the people you want anymore. You know, it's kind of, this isn't good. So I think this can be done right, and I think that this effort has been a huge part to contributing to it, and I would like to have the DPW and the town resource management be a huge part of this conversation so we can avoid the problem before we get to it.
Yeah. You might want to consider joining the Rockport Affordable Housing Coalition. Because that's, you know, we're building a coalition, absolutely, absolutely. Did you want to respond? Go ahead.
You know, it sounds like DPW is part of the conversation because they gave this presentation that is clearly stimulating a lot of dialogue. So I think that's great. And you know, we've got 2 years before the compliance deadline comes along. So there's.
But we're changing our zoning laws now.
They're trying to force the zoning change.
Yeah. So this conversation needs to happen now, not after the zoning law.
We're having it. This is it. This is the conversation. This is the conversation. This is the dialogue that we're having right now. I will say that.
It only happens because it's out of towners that are presenting the issues.
Well, 60% of the multifamily zone can be outside of that half-mile MBTA station.
Still taking trees down.
Pardon?
You're still taking trees down to build property, to build houses. It's still an issue. It doesn't matter if it's in town or out of town.
I think we need to give her a chance to answer the question, if there was a question.
I'm gonna pass on that.
Okay, all right, for a Zoom question, please.
Sandy, go ahead.
Yep. My question is just to round out the picture. I would like to understand what action the state would take against the town if we don't comply. And I thought that was going to be covered today.
You know this one. Well, there's 4 sectors that would be financially impacted. Well, 3 organizations and the Rockport Public Housing Authority as well. Some amount of funds will be reduced from the state for Rockport Public Housing if we do not comply by 22 months from now for the December 31st, 2024 deadline. And those impacts, we're following along with the program and we're submitting things as we should, unlike I think Waltham, where they did not submit their action plan and immediately got a letter from the state that $300,000 worth of funds for their public housing authority would be withdrawn immediately. The state has stepped back on that, but still they're expecting a $70,000 to $100,000 cut in their public housing authority there. Waltham's bigger than we are, but you can do the math and scale it down. And then there's 3 other organizations that supply the Housing Choice Initiative, the MassWorks Infrastructure Program, and the Local Capital Projects Fund for the state Local Capital Projects Fund. Those things are really hard to determine in terms of the monetary impact because we may ask for $7 million from one of those organizations to rebuild our sewer system 5 years from now or 10 years from now. It's hard to calculate that. I am trying to dig into that to see what has been historically the money that we've gotten through those venues. And maybe you guys can speak to that a little bit more. But there is significant financial impact along the way, and possibly major infrastructure penalties if we don't comply with this rezoning. You want to add to that?
Yeah,
Andrew?
that's great, really helpful. I think the other thing that I'm hearing may happen is there are some communities that are weighing this idea, you know, of not complying. I know we're not specifically here about the MBTA rules, but and it's possible. My guess is somebody will try that, and it'll end up in litigation. So there are already communities talking about doing that, and there are other groups talking about taking that to court. So my hunch is somebody will try it, and that's what'll happen.
Okay, Toby, go ahead.
Toby Arsenian, 95 Granite Street. Starting with where you just left off, the possible penalties if we don't comply with the state's directives on the zoning. I went to the Finance Committee last year when this was coming before a town meeting to inquire of them if anyone knew what programs would be cut, what state aid programs, and it was handed over to the town administrator to find out, and at that point the answer was we got nothing from the 4 programs that were likely to be cut. Now, the state has upped the ante, and that may have changed. But before we're all threatened with dire consequences, somebody needs to get it out of the Finance Committee to verify it, how much exactly is at stake. And earlier, Robert Simmons said regarding the train station zoning that we can add in a percentage for affordable housing. And I have here Article L, which is going to come back to the town meeting floor in less than 2 weeks, or slightly over 2 weeks, April Fool's Day, April 1st, at 8:30. We all foregather and continue where we left off with Article J. But Article L, which is the section in the zoning, Roman numeral 8, special regulations, relates, and this is section Q, which will now be section J, and I'll read it to you because this is significant. In order to secure that new residential development being granted special consideration under the zoning bylaw will, at minimum, meet its own share of providing for the diversity and balance of housing in Rockport, the following shall be complied with by all housing developments of 6 or more residential units authorized by special permits. And it goes on from there. And the planning board is making changes in it, which they believe to be improvements. I'm not so sure. But it leaves that condition. Special permits is what triggers the need for affordable housing under the zoning. And the state's regulations specify that all of this at the train station, if it's to meet the state requirements, has to be by right. So you've got a basic disconnect there. And what follows from that is if somebody happened to go and buy all of the Smith's property tomorrow, as was falsely rumored, and I stupidly spread the rumor at a planning board meeting, having heard it at a meeting of the Rockport Community Civic League.
We forgive you.
And I don't forgive myself. Jay Smith called to reproach me, and I abjectly apologized. But what follows from that is if something did happen there tomorrow, we're not going to get one single unit of affordable housing out of it. Not one. Would somebody from the planning board please comment on that?
Well, yeah, and that's where the ability for us to do to create. We've created one overlay district, but to create another overlay district for the rest of the requirements for the MBTA, we have the ability to put that in as a requirement. And then we're trying to get input from the town on whether that would be 5%, 10%, 20%, what we would like to see.
It's not there now, and we've already authorized the train station village overlay, transportation-oriented village overlay district. I call it the instant slum at the train station. We've already authorized it, and someone could arrive tomorrow and file plans for the housing, and there would be no affordable housing there. It's on your heads.
We take a Zoom question?
I don't think we have one.
We don't have one? We're done? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Hi,
George.
Jim Ugoni, 33 Main Street. I'm kind of going to pack 2 questions into one if I can. One is that when we look at what Toby's talking about, and we've talked about some profit restraints and zoning restraints and all these things we can try to do to influence what can be built, where it can be built, how it can be built, it's exhausting. But what my bigger question is, one of the other elephants in the room is always the threat. I perceive it as a threat, and that's my question to you, is about an impending 40B property. And to really clarify what that means, I'd like your help, and also to mention some of the constraints that a 40B project, what it means, and what types of constraints it isn't under if one were to come into town, and what does that really mean to this project? My second question is the master plan that may be listing at the master plan that I think, which is the interconnections between departments and committees throughout the town, seems to also be missing at the state level. And you're asking us to focus everything on a train to nowhere for people from Rockport. I've lived here for a long time. There's nowhere for me to go. Why isn't the smart growth element at the state level, and maybe you can talk about this, Andrew, at your meetings, is to build something that's actually worth going to, that I can get off a train. Like the Cummings Center should have been on the train line, so maybe I could have gone to a doctor's appointment when I get older. But right now, you know, the Bruins are good. You can't even get a ticket. And I have, I just have no interest in this whole bigger master plan that seems to be vacant in any of these decisions.
Take that one.
Okay. Hi, Zan. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you.
I think we met in the zoning meetings, right? I thought so. You look familiar.
See you.
Yeah, no changes. It's been 5-6 years. You look just as good.
Thank you. You too.
So I definitely don't. But so the two things. The 40B question is actually a really good one. It doesn't get people don't bring it up much, but it's really actually quite clever. And then I'll take the other one, though I have much less authority or experience with the second one.
Louder, please.
On the first one, people are familiar with 40B. I guess I shouldn't assume.
No.
So I'll do a nickel real quick, right? So 40B is the state law from the late 60s that essentially requires every community to have 10% of its housing stock as affordable per their guidelines. That doesn't necessarily mean it actually feels affordable. So just to clarify, it's a rule-based system. And so what it allows then is, and this is the answer to your question, is it allows a developer to come to a community that doesn't have 10% affordable. That means deed restricted on the books affordable, and which you guys don't. I think you're around 4%. And it allows them to come in and they can essentially override all of your zoning laws. Now they still have to go through a process with the zoning board. The planning board will give feedback into that process, as will all the
site
other
plan review and all that stuff I mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Yep, so they still
it's
have
not a done deal.
They still have wax at it, right? They can take wax at it and form it, but at a practical level, the developer can argue for exemption from things. They cannot argue for exemption from anything related to the Concom, which I think was your question. What applies? What doesn't apply?
Big
So you
answer.
can't violate a wetland barrier. That would supersede it. So as it pertains to the MBTA question, and why I'm rooting for 20% affordability, which I hope is clear, is that any units that you get that are deed restricted through the MBTA process will raise your number, which will mitigate risk over to the side on the 40B process. But doing the MBTA zoning doesn't automatically exempt you from 40B. They're not related sideways that way. But if you do, as a practical matter, have more affordable housing units, particularly if you do that via your housing production plan. So not to get too deep into this, but it will matter. So if you have a housing production plan, which is a document the state approves at DHCD, it will delineate how many affordable units you need to add in increments per year. And usually that's a fairly modest number. So if you have one of those plans and you're adding units through your MBTA zoning, you'll be in compliance with your production plan. If you're in compliance with your production plan, you can essentially deny 40Bs even if you're not at 10% yet. Everybody got that?
Yeah.
So that if you're this is now my friend of Rockport hat on. If you're trying to figure out the mechanics, you want to have a housing production plan and you want to be meeting its goals annually, that will hold your 40B fear. And then this MBTA thing can be used, I think as Lily mentioned, for your goal, right? You can use it, make it work for you, because it's going to have to happen. So you make it work to your ends, and this is one of the ways you can do it. Your second question, which was around interaction at the state level, I think is a perennial difficult question. We run into it constantly in various ways. I don't know a better way to answer it other than to keep saying it, which I think you should. We have this problem, for example, when we're trying to do elderly housing and meet elderly supportive needs. That exists under the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, and then I'm dealing with housing in this other lane under a different, and they don't, it doesn't, and I'll say, how come I can't? And I'm trying to help somebody do this, and anyway, there's not, the sideways is difficult. So keep raising it, we all have to. We don't have a good answer for that.
Just to follow up to Andrew's point, the first point, the housing production plan.
Yeah.
The residents of Rockport should realize the town of Rockport has never done a housing production
You should.
plan. And we are one of very few towns, maybe the only town on the North Shore that has not done one. Now, fortunately, we've been at this for a little period of time. We did receive two contractors who submitted bids to provide Rockport with a housing production plan. And I can't tell you because I simply don't know whether or not we've awarded a contract yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah, I think it's a good move for
It's a necessary, absolutely necessary move.
Agreed.
If you're interested, Ipswich, I think, did one last year, and it's online. You can take a look at it, and it shows, you know, they decided they needed 27 affordable units per year for the next number of years to meet their goal. In a nutshell, Rockport, I believe, these numbers aren't exact, but we have about 135 affordable units here, I believe. We need about 300 more, roughly, to meet that 10% goal, just as a understanding the scale of the problem here.
So this is, we're at our time limit. We said 1:30, actually we're at 1:35. And I just want to thank our panelists. We really, really appreciate you being here and getting here.
Glad to be here.
More of these. Please leave your card. If you didn't get a question answered or you have more questions, please leave them with us. We'll make some decisions about whether to continue this. Perhaps inviting the water people and the DPW.
Thank you very much.
So please keep it up. If you would like to join us, please let Mary Jo know on your way out. Yes.
Oh, can you also invite an MBTA rep? That would be awesome.
Yes, yes. So if you missed some things, this is a hard topic. If you missed some things, go to the website. Everything is recorded. All the handouts are there. And we appreciate you taking some time today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.